Since foot and mouth disease was detected in a herd of water buffalo in Germany this year, the European Union has been on high alert as the disease has moved into Hungary and Slovakia, infecting several cattle herds in those countries. Before the outbreak in Germany, Europe's last positive case was in 2011. The United States has been FMD-free since 1929. So should U.S. pork producers be concerned? Joining us to give an update on this foreign animal disease and U.S. prevention preparedness efforts and Swine Health Information Center Executive Director, Megan Niederwerder. Welcome, Megan, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Ann.
Before we jump into our discussion, I'd like to remind the audience, if you have any questions for Megan, be sure to place those there in the chat, or if you're tuning in via social media, we'll be sure to get those over to her. So, Megan, I believe you're kicking off our session today with a presentation on what's going on with FMD in Europe and maybe across some other areas across the globe. I'll hand the floor over to you now.
Yeah, sounds good, Ann. Thanks so much for having me and for the opportunity to keep FMD at the forefront of our minds. Certainly, we want to do everything we can to maintain a negative status in the U.S., and I want to share with you today some of the updates with regards to FMD and what's going on globally. So first, why are we talking about FMD with SHIC? The mission of the Swine Health Information Center is to protect and enhance the health of the U.S. swine herd by minimizing the impact of emerging disease threats. We were launched in 2015 with pork checkoff funding, and we execute our mission through various activities, including preparedness, coordinated communications, global disease monitoring, analysis of swine health data, and then taking that information and targeting research investments that provide the greatest value back to pork producers to minimize the risk of emerging disease. So when we do our global disease monitoring, anytime a virus or bacteria pathogen is introduced into either a new geographic range or is it affecting animals in a new way, we want to make sure that pork producers and veterinarians are aware of the threat and minimizing any risks. So first, I thought I'd start us out with a couple of slides on foot and mouth disease virus, commonly known as FMDV. It is a RNA virus that is non-enveloped, and that comes into with our information about the resistance to environmental conditions. It is very hardy in the environment, meaning it stays and maintains infectivity for long periods. It's very contagious or transmissible between animals, and it affects cloven-hoofed livestock and wildlife, meaning that pigs are not the only species that can be affected by this. Certainly the cattle industry is at risk, as well as sheep and goats. And then we have to think about cloven-hoofed zoo animals or wildlife. So in our country, we think about feral swine, of course. We think about white-tailed deer. And so there are some, it is complicated with regards to the risks and the animals that can be infected. It can cause significant economic losses due to restrictions on international livestock trade. It disrupts those normal trade agreements. It causes reduced meat and milk production, and it causes significant financial resources to control the disease. It's endemic in many countries of the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and in parts of South America. But thankfully, the last U.S. case has been in 1929, and we want to keep our country negative. There are 7 major serotypes. This becomes important with regards to the updates as new serotypes have recently been introduced into regions that may be endemic for other serotypes. So that indicates that the virus is moving with regards to these serotypes. The O serotype is the most common, but unfortunately, there is not cross-protective immunity between serotypes, meaning if an animal is infected with one serotype, it is not necessarily protected from infection with another serotype. Another reason this virus is so concerning to the U.S. swine industry is that it is highly transmissible. It spreads from animal to animal fairly quickly. That can occur through direct or indirect contact with secretions such as respiratory discharge, nasal discharge, milk, semen, and it can infect meat. It can also be transmitted by mechanical vectors or fomites. So think about humans cannot become infected with the virus. They are not susceptible, but they can transfer the virus on their clothing, their boots, their vehicles, of course, as vehicles go from site to site. And you can think about even other animals serving as a vector from moving the virus from one location to another. It can also be transmitted through aerosolization. And this virus is unique in that it has the potential to be transmitted fairly long distances in aerosolized particles. The disease is characterized by fever and vesicles in the oral cavity and around the mouth and feet. Certainly the name of the virus gives that indication. So you'll see blisters appear that then become swollen, become red, then rupture, and can cause very painful lesions. Because it's so transmissible, many of the animals that become in contact with the virus show clinical signs. But there are very rare fatalities, meaning that the virus does not cause high mortality rates, but does cause clinical signs frequently in a large portion of the animals. In pigs, they oftentimes develop this blanching around the coronary band, and I'll show some images as a characteristic lesion. That causes lameness, it causes fever. They can also develop vesicles on other areas of the hoof, the mammary glands, the tongue, the mouth, and the snout. Fortunately, FMD is not a public health or a food safety threat. Pork continues to be safe to consume, and again, humans cannot become infected. When we look at what these lesions appear in pigs, we can see that the vesicular diseases overall appear very similarly in pigs. So when we think about Seneca virus A, which is an endemic vesicular disease in the US, the lesions appear very similar to what FMD would look like should it be introduced into the country. We see again this fairly consistent blanching of the coronary band on the hoof, and oftentimes the lesions of these vesicles or blisters are clinically indistinguishable against these vesicular diseases. And so we have to do additional diagnostics, oftentimes PCR testing, to confirm or rule out which vesicular disease is the cause. Certainly we want to rule out FMD when there is vesicular lesions. When we look at what this looks like again in pigs, that blanching close to the coronary band can then become swollen, it can rupture, it can cause lesions in between the digits. It can also cause those blisters that may rupture after swelling on the nose, the snout, the mouth, the oral cavity. You can also see those on the mammary glands, and those are certainly cause the pig pain with these lesions after rupture. You can also see lesions in some of the haired skin around the hock area or those pressure points. You can also see it around the chin, and those vesicles on the tongue can result in sloughing of the epithelium, again, very painful with regards to lesions. When FMD first infects a pig, the lesions show up as swelling with regards to the vesicles. So you can see that sort of whitened, swollen area around the hoofs, the coronary bands. They have a characteristic look of swelling and whiteness. And these lesions can progress over time with sloughing and even chronic healing of the lesions. These lesions can be very painful when they are going through the sloughing occurrence, and these pigs may not feel well enough to stand and walk around normally. They have a lot of lethargy and, of course, do not move around the pen as usual. I'd like to acknowledge Dr. John Arts and Dr. Carolina Steinfeld. They do this research that has provided these images, really state-of-the-art research on foot and mouth disease virus at the Plum Island Animal Disease Center, and have really advanced our knowledge with regards to risks and mitigation of FMD in swine. So the reason we're talking about FMD today, and of course we've known about this virus for many decades. We haven't had a case in the US for close to a century, but we want to talk about it because we have seen this increased movement of FMD in various regions of the world. This is our global swine disease surveillance report put out by the Swine Health Information Center each month. This was the report that was published on Wednesday, May 7th. And this report is put together by the Center for Animal Health and Food Safety at the University of Minnesota. It is led by the principal investigator, Dr. Sol Perez, and she has a fantastic team there that helped put together the global disease reports, but also helped put together some of the slides with regards to the global situation currently. What you can see here is that on the outbreaks brief, which is the first page of the report, there were 7 outbreaks discussed, and 5 of those are FMD. This is not typical for these reports, and so you can see again this increase with regards to movement of FMD, either serotypes or the virus in general, into new regions of the globe. And we want to increase the awareness to producers and veterinarians what's going on around the globe and how does this change the risk of the US. So when we think about FMD globally and what's the status of many of the countries that we're going to talk about today, you can see that all of North America is free of FMD without vaccination. There are areas in South America that are free from FMD with vaccination, and then other regions in the world that show up on this map as gray from the World Organization for Animal Health that you'll see in the following slide as is endemic for FMD, many of those countries. Importantly, what you see on this map also is 2 countries, Slovakia and Hungary, that had suspension of their FMD-free status due to recent outbreaks and reincursions of the virus. And we'll get into more details through the presentation. What you can see here, again, a very similar map, but instead of the gray boxes, you can see those countries in red that are considered endemic for FMD virus. Importantly, these regions in the world that have consistent circulation of FMD oftentimes have specific serotypes that are located in the country. And so those animals within the country develop immunity. They may be vaccinated for FMD, but those vaccinations and that exposure is specific to the serotypes that are circulating. So it becomes complicated when new serotypes are introduced. Again, very little cross protection across serotypes, and it indicates that there is viral movement and spread outside of these typical exposures across the world. So the first introduction we'll talk a little bit about that Anne mentioned is the Germany outbreak. This occurred on January 10th of 2025, so right at the beginning of this year. It was the first outbreak since 1988, which was about 37 years of maintaining a negative status. The outbreak occurred with serotype O, which is a serotype commonly found in the Middle East and Asia. It affected 14 animals of a water buffalo herd, and it was in areas very close outside Berlin. They took rapid action to eradicate the FMD virus after introduction. The measures that were taken include culling all susceptible animals within a 1 kilometer radius. That included every animal that was potentially susceptible as a cloven-hoofed livestock, pigs, goats, sheep, and cattle. There was a movement standstill for those cloven-hoofed animals. In addition, they had routine testing in both the protection zone, the surveillance zone, as well as the contact establishments that could have had contact with that infected herd. They sampled the wild cloven-hoofed animals, and all those tests were negative, including the contact premises. On March 12th of 2025, about 2 months after the first detection, WOA approved the containment zone in Brandenburg and Berlin, established that there was no further spread, and by April 14th, Germany had regained its free from FMD without vaccination status by the World Organization for Animal Health. This was certainly a success story with regards to rapid eradication, containment of the virus, and elimination of further spread. The second outbreak in the EU that we saw this year was in Hungary. Their first case was reported on March 7th of 2025. It was the first FMD case since 1973, so they had maintained over 50 years of negative status. And now there's been a total of 5 outbreaks. It again was the serotype O, but it was determined that it was not the same virus that was introduced into Germany. It was a different virus, a different serotype O virus that had the highest similarity to a strain that was isolated in Pakistan in 2017-2018. There were over 8,500 cattle that were affected across 5 farms in various regions of northwest Hungary. And they, again, took very rapid measures to contain and prevent further spread of the outbreak, including a movement ban on any cloven-hoofed animals. They utilized vaccination in this case to reduce the viral pressure or the viral contamination in the environment prior to slaughter of those animals. They also had a stamping out procedure of both the outbreak holding as well as any contact holdings and trace those animals backward and forward. The last outbreak that's been reported in Hungary was on April 17th. And if they can continue to maintain a negative status without additional outbreaks until May 31st, there is a potential that they will be able to also regain their FMD-free status. The third country we'll talk about with regards to the EU introductions in 2025 is Slovakia. Their first detection was on March 21st of 2025. Again, first outbreak since 1973, about 50 years of maintaining negative status. They now have a total of 6 outbreaks. It is the serotype O that was very closely related to that strain from Pakistan in 2018. Fully matches the virus in Hungary. So we know that those 2 countries, of course, are border countries, and that the virus detected in those 2 countries was identical. In Slovakia, there were 7,400 cattle affected across these 6 farms in various regions. Primarily, the farms affected were on the border with Hungary, but there was also another farm that was affected in Slovakia on the border with Austria. Very quickly took measures to contain the virus with a movement ban. They also utilized suppressive vaccination to reduce that viral load in those animals prior to culling. They used the Boehringer-Ingelheim vaccine, which contains an inactivated FMD virus, serotype O. They also had slaughter of animals both on the affected premise and within the protection zone, did epidemiological investigations to trace those animals, tested several of the wild game, those cloven-hoofed animals that were wildlife in the region, including wild boar that they utilized the samples that they were also testing for ASF. They strengthened those biosecurity checks across farms and across borders and increased those road and border crossing checks. Their last outbreak in Slovakia was reported on April 4th of 2025. Certainly, if they are able to maintain a negative status and not have additional outbreaks, they will be at the evaluation of WOA again to regain that free status. So one of the questions, of course, when this happens, when you have a negative country for several decades and the virus is introduced, you say, how did this happen? What changed? What risk factor was modified so that the virus could be introduced into the country? And as we think about the U.S. risk, we want to understand, do we have that same risk? How can we put in protocols and procedures to reduce that risk for FMD being introduced into our country? And so a couple of the reports that have come out from both Hungary and Slovakia have indicated some of their epidemiological investigation findings. And in Hungary, for example, they said, according to available information, there is no indication that the virus was introduced into the establishment through movements of animals or semen, and at a lesser certainty, equipment or vehicles. The role of people carrying virus into the farm remains unclear. Similar from Slovakia, available information says there's no indication that the virus was introduced through movement of animals or semen, and at a lesser certainty, equipment or vehicles. The initial source of these outbreaks remains unknown. However, the epidemiological investigations do indicate that people could have played a role in serving as a fomite for the virus. So that could be personnel going from farm to farm, perhaps with dirty boots or dirty clothing, those visits or construction. There may be maintenance workers through farm visits. So it's certainly something we want to consider with regards to reducing our risk of spread and introduction. There have been significant implications of this FMD detection in Hungary and Slovakia: trade disruptions, stricter border controls, economic losses, EU regionalization measures, and there's been an international concern and response. How did this virus get reintroduced into the EU? How can we learn from the experience of these EU countries with regards to success and risk factors? How do we modify our biosecurity practices to best prevent any risk of FMD being introduced? More recently, we've seen some indication of new serotypes being introduced into a few of the Near East countries. I'll give a couple of examples here. In Iraq, on May 5th of 2025, there were 9 outbreaks reported to the World Organization for Animal Health for FMD serotype SAT1. These indicated that the start dates of the outbreaks were actually in January and February of 2025. This country is endemic for FMD, but it's typically serotype O and SAT2. SAT1 is a new strain introduced into the country. These outbreaks have affected buffaloes and cattle. And what is really concerning about this introduction is this FMD SAT1 circulation is typically limited to sub-Saharan Africa, with the recently detected lineage in the Near East being most closely related to a virus that was characterized in Eastern Africa over 5 years ago. Again, SAT1 has typically not been in the Near East and Western Eurasia, and the last time that specific serotype was widely circulating in the region was 1962. This serotype has also been detected in Bahrain and Kuwait really recently, indicating that there is an increased movement of this serotype. The second example just happened 4 days ago, this introduction into Turkey. May 16th, 2025, FMD serotype SAT1 reported for the first time in the country since 1965. There are 3 ongoing outbreaks that began on April 30th. They do have a vaccine campaign in that country, but is not focused on serotype SAT1. They saw salivation, vesicles in the mouth and nose in cattle after the spring FMD vaccination period, and did testing there and were able to identify this new serotype SAT1 that was introduced into the country. These outbreaks, 2 of them are occurring on the border between Turkey and Iraq. When we think about learning these new risks with regards to reintroduction of the virus into several EU countries and introduction of new serotypes into Near and Middle East countries that are endemic for the virus, but this is a new serotype introduced, we want to think about how do we increase awareness about the resources, about what's going on globally, how can we provide that information to producers and veterinarians to maintain this virus at the forefront for protection and prevention and mitigation efforts. And so I just want to make everybody aware, the SHIC AASV webinar, we had a webinar on FMD risks It provides additional information. We had a speaker from Germany as well as Hungary. You can hear more on the ground experience and images and what exactly they did in response. We also had Dr. Sol Perez and Dr. John Arts, as well as Dr. Patrick Webb on, and that is now available for on-demand viewing on the SHIC website, as well as the AESV website. We put out our global swine disease monthly monitoring reports. That's a way that everybody can stay up to date on the countries that have these viruses circulating. The National Pork Board offers barn posters where there are images of the lesions to maintain awareness for animal caretakers. The Secure Pork Supply has visitor and producer biosecurity practices and protocols, as well as employee training through both Secure Pork Supply as well as the Center for Food Security and Public Health. As we think about biosecurity risks, we want to think about employee downtime. So if your employees are visiting countries that have FMD circulating, either in an endemic status or in a new introduction, you want to have downtime before those employees are reintroduced into your swine herd. We also want to think about prevention of fomite transmission, having site-specific footwear and clothing, supplies and equipment. We want to think about operational connections because this virus does not only affect swine, it can affect cattle, it can affect cloven-hoofed wildlife. We want to think about what operational connections could be putting it at risk for our swine herds. And certainly illegal trade and travel of animal products is a big risk that we need to continue to have on the forefront. Importantly, these FMD lesions, vesicular lesions, are reportable. So FMD is a reportable disease. Anytime that vesicular lesions are seen in your swine herd, these need to be notified for the state or federal veterinary authorities as soon as those vesicular lesions are seen. We want to do everything we can to prevent spread should there be an incursion and to rule out FMD when we're looking at comparison with some of our endemic vesicular diseases. And that's my last slide, Anne. And so I hope we can provide that good information about resources, but also happy to take any questions at this time.
Yeah, absolutely, Megan. Thank you so much for your insight and perspective there. Maybe just real quick, we have time for one question. You know, I think this is always on the back of my head too, as we go to these meetings and we're talking African swine fever and we're talking JEV and now we're talking FMD. For producers at home that are maybe getting a little FAD fatigue, what would be maybe your one or two key takeaways from our discussion here today and things they should keep in mind on farm?
Yeah, I think one of the ways in which that global disease monitoring report can be really helpful is that there's a summary, a single-page summary, so that you know what are the new outbreaks occurring in countries globally, and it can maintain your awareness. Oftentimes, we don't understand when we think about animal caretakers traveling where those risks are occurring, and we really try and provide that information again for employee awareness. I think also thinking about biosecurity and biosecurity fatigue, as we think about some of these risks that are common across all foreign animal disease and oftentimes even endemic disease, we have to think about rewarding our animal caretakers and individuals on farm for executing those biosecurity practices. We want to make sure people feel good about what they're doing every day and not only just presenting the protocols, but really rewarding those individuals that are consistent and compliant and really encouraging that passion for biosecurity to protect the health of our swine.
Great points to end on. Megan Niederwerder with Swine Health Information Center. We appreciate you taking the time to join us today and sharing your insight.
Thanks so much for having me, Anne.
Up next, we'll have one of the most highly anticipated sessions of the day, National Hog Farmers 2025 New Product Tour. We hope to see you there.